Haley, what are some other behaviors and examples that you could give us in dating, running across a sociopath or a psychopath?
So they're going to be very demanding, and they're going to be increasingly demanding. A lot of the things that they tend to do, they're going to be very obsessive over you, very, very possessive. You're property to them. You're an object. You are their supply. Especially in psychopaths, they're not going to hide it much. Let's just say that. They're going to be very pushy. They're going to push for sex. They're going to push for physical touch. They're going to, because that's how they connect with you, and that's how they get you addicted, because that's how they get the dopamine flowing. That's how they get the oxytocin flowing. That's how they get to you. And especially as a codependent, for the people who love to attach to that, we love to be held. We love to be feeling good. In fact, we take long warm showers because we feel lonely. So we're very physically oriented. So they know that. And whether they know that psychologically or they know that subconsciously, they know that. And that's what they use. And so they will try to get to you in any way, shape, or form. So if you have kids, or if they have kids, they're going to try and get to your kids. They're going to try and build a connection with them so they can use it later with you. Or they'll use their kids to build a connection with you if you like kids, and they know that. So they observe everything that you do. They're going to find your weaknesses. They're going to exploit your weaknesses, and they're going to use it against you and for their own gain.
Moving fast and forward from dating to maybe being in an actual relationship with a sociopath, or even married to a sociopath or a psychopath, what are some behaviors that you're going to identify or you're going to see? Let me ask you this question then, Haley. With psychopaths and sociopaths embodying some of those behaviors that you're talking about on a sexual level, are there any semi-healthy people that could embody some of those similar, I wouldn't say similar behaviors, but maybe where they've formed a connection with somebody and they want to be intimate within that night, maybe where it's not being pushed, not kind of done more, maybe more in a passive way? Could it also be something healthy? Is it only unhealthy when somebody is pushing for sex that within the first night, and or is it the first few nights? Could you clarify that?
I would say that's unhealthy across the board. Whether or not you have a personality disorder or not, it's unhealthy across the board. Only because sex is such an intimate thing, but it creates this thing called imitation love. And it's not an actual form of real love. Real love is deeper, it's connective. The intentions are different. The intentions are for the long haul. Whereas sex might just be the intention for the short term, for that dopamine rush, right? Now I'm not the moral police here, right? I'm not gonna say like, oh, you can't have sex the first night. I'm just saying it convolutes things a lot. It changes the communication patterns from that point on in your relationship, and the foundations that are required to build a healthy relationship, long-term love, just aren't there. Now there's definitely relationships out there that have slept together on the first night and they're together 40 years later, so I think it really just boils down to the types of people that are entering into the relationships, their mindset. Are they healthy? Are they their best selves? And are they coming together to form a relationship where they can work together in order to build something greater? Or is one of them or both of them lacking and needy and not fulfilling their own needs and looking to their partner to fill their needs? Because that is unhealthy and that's toxic. And that sets you up for these types of relationships.
Right. Well, and kind of moving fast and forward from dating to maybe being in an actual relationship with a sociopath, or even married to a sociopath or a psychopath, what are some behaviors that you're going to identify or you're going to see? It was interesting when I was reading The Sociopath Next Door. It was talking about a married couple, and it talked about an example of a man who, as a young boy, had gone down to the pond, and I think it was frogs or something similar to that he would take firecrackers to and blow them up. Fast forward, everything else about him was normal. Straight A student. He no longer did some of those gruesome things as he got older, but didn't seem to have any remorse with people that he was dealing with, but yet did with women. Let me rephrase this. So he was charismatic and charming with women, and could even be, with individual males that he desired a purpose from. He knew how to pull the puppet strings. And so as time evolved, in this particular example of what I was reading, this man became this corporate influencer, worked his way up to the top, and had married one of the most beautiful women. And meanwhile, he is being unfaithful with her and has all these secretaries that, I think from what I remember, and don't quote me on this, but from what I remember, I think that he was having these sexual forced intercourses on these women, and then would buy them off. In fact, it wasn't even him that bought them off, it was his boss to shut him up. So nothing could be done about it, but yet this woman that he was married to had no idea. And so it really eye-opening. And if you could elaborate and kind of go into that, or maybe some things that somebody who's married or in a situation like that could identify as a red flag, when everything appears normal and they're charming and they're taking care of you.
I'm going to switch this up a little bit, because I think a lot of the red flags are within us that we don't acknowledge. So I would say to the person who is married to this person, how many excuses did you make for his behavior? And that is a red flag as well. So there's two sides to this, two red flags going on. How much of this are you allowing? And then how much of this are they doing? So taking that scenario, the first red flag was how he treated the frogs down at the pond and the firecrackers, right? No regard for their feelings, or their state of being, or their safety, or their environment, right? So it's gonna start there. Success driven. That is a red flag too. Not saying that all people who are success driven have these traits, but that is an indicator. And then the trophy wife image. What does their image look like? Even though they're doing something else in the shadows, cheating is a huge one, and a lot of them cheat. A lot of them are because it's more supply. And if you only have one person that you're married to, you drain them, where are you going to get your supply while they're drained? Other people. So cheating is huge. And then however he got his boss on board, that is also another red flag. How did he manipulate his way out of that one? Right? So it's all kind of a manipulation. Right. It's all a show. It's all that Mysterio fantasy of, I'm going to create a fantasy that it makes me look like I'm doing something, when really I'm doing things on the side, in the shadows.
Not all people that have goals and that want to advance their careers and provide for themselves, not all of them are psychopaths or sociopaths.
No.
How do you tell the difference?
The difference is the amount of symptoms and the patterns of behavior. And the patterns of behavior will show you over time what they're doing. And so psychopaths, they tend to keep by themselves, right? And let's take an extreme example of a psychopath. Let's take the serial killers, right? They love to isolate. They love to stay in the shadows. No one really knows about their life because they don't really share much about their life, unless you're Ted Bundy. Then he's really super charismatic, right? But a lot of them tend to keep to themselves. And you won't know much about them, but they'll know a lot about you. They're very observative, and they're very, psychopaths are very calculated too. And so they do a lot of things that are egocentric. They might be grandiose. They might be fearless. They might want to push the boundaries of adrenaline. They might, be ruthless. They might be cold. They might be, pathological liars. And so that's like on the psychopath side, whereas sociopaths, they're more of like just a downgraded version. They can do the same traits, but they're more shaped by the environment. So if something happens, let's just say that they get cut off in traffic, they're going to be a lot more impulsive and a lot more aggressive and a lot more rageful than maybe like a psychopath would be. And so these are all telltale signs over time. And if the behavior is consistent, and if it gets more intense, and if it gets worse over time, then you definitely have a leg to stand on for that type of diagnosis.
Is road rage always a symptom of a narcissist, borderline, psychopath, or a sociopath?
No, because I get road rage sometimes.
Okay.
And like little old ladies get road rage. Like there was, oh gosh. And especially people who like rev their cars. Like there's this, I live in Vegas, okay? Like there's a lot of people around here that like to have loud things to be seen and to be heard. And like there's these cars that run down the road and they just sound awful. And I'm like, you need a new muffler. Like, what are you doing? So no, it's not the same. But there are very specific symptoms that are listed in the DSM-5, and I can't wait until the DSM-6 comes out, because I honestly feel like a lot of these trauma diagnoses aren't very, they're not specific enough. There's symptoms that they show that say that yes, you are this thing, but I think that we need a lot more trauma in the DSM-6, but that's just my professional opinion about it. But that's what we go off of. That's how we can say, yes, this is a narcissist, or yes, this is borderline personality disorder. These are the symptoms that say this. But I always say, like, I stay away from diagnosis, because it's like you put a label on something. Yes, you have an idea of what it is now, and now you have a plan, great, but that's not really what's going on here. What's really going on here is the trauma that caused it, and what happened to cause pain, and can it be reversed? Can it be curable? That's what I want to know.
Fascinating. Be nice if we could gain some answers and some insight in that. Do you think that the DSM-6 is going to embody some of the telling signs for that? Do you think we've evolved there?
Hopefully. There's talk about it. There's talk about some changes, which is great. A lot of the therapists that you talk to will say like, oh, DSM-5, like, yeah, that's great. But it's so much more complex, because human behavior is complex. You can't just fit everybody into a mold and say like you fit into this box. It's like, okay, so how I work is, what's the core issue? What is the core thing that's causing you pain right now? And then let's work backwards at this. Okay, so this causes you pain now. Where did this start? How did you feel? Where in your body did you feel this? And have you ever felt like this before? And then we work backwards to say, okay, so this is what caused it. Now we can reverse engineer in order to create a pathway forward. And I've worked in prisons, and I've worked rehabbing these individuals, and there are people who cannot be cured right now. Not to say that they can't be cured in the future, but their mind is so warped. It's so dead. It's so in unreality world is what I call it, Alice in Wonderland. They're so far down the rabbit hole that they just can't come back from it. Or they don't want to. They're not willing to, or they don't know how to. And some can improve. I've seen it. I've seen some improve, but for the most part, there's a lot of people who can't improve. And so the question becomes, as a society, how do we deal with this? And then we get into the systems. And, I can talk about that all day.
Right.
Of like what we're doing to help these individuals so they don't harm anybody.
What is the difference between, or is there a difference between a male and a female psychopath or sociopath?
There is, definitely. I think that females tend to be more aggressive, actually, more emotional, more manipulative, more conniving, more premeditative, more, I mean, you go to a male prison, you go to a female prison, it's completely different. Females tend to just take everything to the max.
What are some typical behaviors that you would see from a female or in dating in it? Let's even dive into the females, because they exist on both spectrums. So men in the community, what could they relate to, and what are some behaviors that they could identify in the beginning when dating a female psychopath or sociopath?
The females are interesting in that the majority of borderline personality disorder diagnoses are with females, whereas narcissistic personality disorder, the majority are males. And I feel like there's a dynamic shift going on. And I feel like more men are being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And I feel like more females are being diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. So there's a huge shift culturally because the roles and the gender roles are changing. And so there's a lot of change on that field. Also, the diagnostic materials that we use are typically gender biased. So I would say that the information that we have out there and what the research shows and all the tests that we run aren't really modernized to the times of how society and culture is changing. So if we look at it from that standpoint, I mean, I can tell you statistics all day, but psychopaths that are incarcerated for murder, they're thrill seekers, right? And 93% of them are male that are incarcerated for murder, that are psychopaths. And so that could give you a good statistic on how many males who commit murder are psychopaths in jail. But that doesn't really state much about females because there's not a whole lot of research on females yet.
Hopefully that rolls out in the DSM-6 and we're able to identify more, because I think it's critical that not only, females be educated on males, but that men also are educated.
There's a lot of people who reach out to me from my podcast that say like, well, what about males? And I talk about this a lot, is that there are those gender role switches, right? And then what about trans? What about, LGBTQI+? There's so many variations out there. So it really just boils down to the core issue of trauma and the core issue of toxicity and how we use and express the trauma that is unsolved within us.
Okay, fascinating. Diving into, let's switch things up a little bit and let's actually dive into some of these sociopaths and psychopaths that are killers. You have Ted Bundy, who came across as, actually listened to an interview of his and an interview of the girl that he was dating, because I wanted to understand before we dove into this series. But it was just fascinating because he just comes across through all the human beings he came across, and everybody that he ran across in his life is charming, a really good person, a stand-up guy, and so you have this image of him being this perfection, and meanwhile he's brutally murdering these women. And as he described it in his interview, he actually would black out, kind of not remember. He would remember, but he didn't remember. Almost like dissociate from his body in some sort of way, if I'm remembering it correct. It was very sad.
How much of that is true? How much of that is a lie? A lot of his, and I've seen them. I've seen the tapes. A lot of his interviews, they're very good manipulators. They're very good liars. That false life that he created, that was his cover. that was his image. That was the image that he was portraying, because it's like, if I'm this perfect person, no one will suspect what I'm doing in the shadows. And whatever I'm doing in the shadows is serving me in some way. It's a thrill seeker. It's an adrenaline rush. It's a high for them. Those murderers is a high. It's a dissociation too. Sometimes people murder and dissociate because they like the dissociation feeling. Regardless, it's all about the feeling and what it does for the individual. And so whether it makes them feel alive because they feel dead inside, or it fulfills some sort of purpose, like Charles Manson, right? We look at him and he's absolutely psychotic, but he was thinking in his mind that he was serving a purpose. That was his goal. And so whatever their goal is, survival, hurt, I want to hurt people because I was hurt, Ed Gein wanted to wear something to wear other people because he didn't have an identity. A lot of them also struggled with porn addiction or sex addiction. A lot of them came from interesting backgrounds, very controlling, manipulative women, controlling, manipulative absent fathers. Like if you look at their stories,